right. Sorry for the delay getting started.
No problem.
How's your week been?
Oh, it's been good. It's been good. I'm in super student mode at the moment because I'm running one of my courses. So well, actually, I suppose I'm in super teacher mode. So
I suppose hang on, that all kicked off last week, right?
Last Thursday, yeah. And so I do. It runs for 3 weeks, and we do three 2-hour Zoom sessions. But of course, everything's changing so quickly. It's a full-time job keeping up with everything. But it's
I don't know how you.
It's super duper interesting.
It's mad. Well, anyway,
it's like what you do. You have to decide what you want to do, and then you adjust your life to doing it. So I have to read lots, which is hardly a pain for me. Obviously, if I did loads of other things, I wouldn't be able to do that. So
you read all the time. I mean, it's nothing new.
Yeah, and my wife goes mad actually because if I'm not reading during the day, I'm listening to podcasts at night, which I know is an absolutely terrible habit, and everyone tells you shouldn't do it. But I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, I just listened to that. And I tend to listen for about 20 minutes, and of course, then fall asleep. So it takes me about 4 nights to actually just listen a whole way through a podcast. But it sort of goes in subliminally.
How long have you been married?
30 years this year. I know. I don't look old enough, definitely.
No, you absolutely don't.
I know.
Well, look, let's just for anybody watching, this is what Anthony and I do randomly. We just sort of hook up and just have a little chat about things that we've been reading mainly, or in your case, listening to at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the idea, this is unscripted. This is just Anthony and I catching up on what we're finding interesting, and we just sort of decide that we want to stream it just to see what others think. And if you want to pile in with some comments, you're more than welcome. If you want to join us, just say you want to join us, and we'll send you a link, and you can join us if you've got something that you think has been worthwhile this week that you want to chat about and hear our perspectives on as well, because it's completely unscripted. We don't really have an agenda other than Anthony's picked a couple of things that he finds interesting at the moment, and I've picked a couple of things that I find interesting. So, Anthony, I want to just to sort of go over, I suppose, what I found quite interesting this week. I'm reading a lot around some of the challenges companies have around innovation, around ambiguity and uncertainty, and the difference between them, and the challenges that leaders have with that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that area. I'd love to get your insights around data. I'm starting to do a big dive into the sort of the data world, and I know you're quite opinionated on that sort of thing. So those are definitely two areas for me, and also some learnings from my Hong Kong visit last week, and some terminology challenges that I've seen. And I think it's not just unique to Hong Kong. I think it's everywhere, and so much so that it's going to go in the book that myself and Dr. Amy are writing at the moment. So there's sort of 2 or 3 things I'd like your opinions on. So do you want to sort of kick it off and tell me what you've found this week that you like?
Okay, well, it's quite interesting. I've actually got three things I want to cover this week.
Okay.
It's actually 2, but one is composed of 2 parts, which actually links quite nicely with what you're talking about. So the first thing I want to talk about, and maybe
yeah, I'll bring it in. Hang on, there you go. I've brought in the screen share.
Okay, so let me just explain this. This is towards the end of a report done by the Canadian workplace analytics company Relogix, Relogix. And most of this data is organized and analyzed by the wonderful Sandra Panera, who we've met before and who has been on actually a couple of my courses. But yeah. Relogix, I think, have the best data on what is actually happening within the office, and where it overlaps with.
Is that's a global perspective, not just Canadian, right?
Yeah, it's global. They do North America, then Europe, and the rest of the world. But where it links very nicely in with you is what's going on in the workplace is a reflection of the same problems that you're talking about. Companies are moving into a different sort of typology, and COVID threw everything up in the air. We're trying to get back to if you like, the mean.
Yeah.
And they are finding it very, very difficult. But a lot of this is to do with individuality, understanding that there is no simple solution. And in the second short report I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about management issues that fit in with this. So just to quickly sum up their report. They talk about the recurring narrative from Castle's reports. So most people probably know Castle do these reports on back to the office and stuff. Hints at a hopeful return to the office trend, but in reality paints a picture of stagnant office attendance. Yet some CEO optimists predict a 5-day return by 2026. They say our AI-powered projections tell a very different story, estimating just 34% occupancy by September 26. And she makes the point that many employees facing fatigue and disillusionment are looking for different work arrangements. Factors like the rising cost of living and changing job landscape, the trend of taking on multiple roles, moonlighting to secure and sustain their future, and the general ineffectiveness of RTO policies will continue to push businesses to consider a broader talent pool, making stringent in-office mandates increasingly unnecessary. And this is the summary, it's a short one. So in summary, they talk about how it is crucial to recognize that office space utilization is far from a one-size-fits-all model. Far too many people are trying to fit everything into a one-size-fits-all model. And the fallacy of a universal benchmark becomes apparent as we observe the diversity in how different organizations employ their office space. So they show that how different companies have totally different usage patterns. And they finish by saying this report crystallizing the notion that there is no uniform solution to office space utilization in the post-pandemic world. It is the recognition of distinctiveness along with a willingness to adapt and evolve that will form the cornerstone of future workspace development. As businesses forge ahead, they should not only consider broad patterns, but also the granular details of their own workforce's needs and behaviors. And so this is all relating to workplace, James, but I suspect that last paragraph, so recognition of distinctiveness, willingness to adapt and evolve, fits in very nicely with what you've been talking with people about.
Yeah, it does actually. I find that word distinctiveness quite interesting. And I'm not sure I entirely understand what they're trying to say with that. Have you got a thought?
I think they just mean everyone's different, and companies are different, divisions are different, teams are different, people are different, and it's by honing in on the particularities of a person and a team primarily that really make the difference. It goes back to we discussed this before about if you think about elite athletes or the famous Sky cycling team marginal improvements business, about they make a 1% improvement to the helmet, they make a 1% improvement to the gears, but they factor everything in to enable that athlete to perform at their very best. What we don't do as businesses and in management and in general business, we don't treat employees in any way like elite athletes. We don't train them, and we don't tailor what they need in order to get the best out of them. And okay, you're never going to be able to go as far as an elite athlete, but it sort of makes the point that if you want your workplace to really work well, it's going to have to suit the genuine wants, needs, and desires of individuals, of teams, and the company. And the more we try and squeeze things into, oh look, everyone's going back, or they're not going back at the moment. Yeah. It sort of doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
So let me just sort of delve into something a little bit. You mentioned in there that, well, actually no, let me ask the question first. Who do you think this report was aimed at, out of interest? Because what I'm intrigued at is there's that one line in there where they say CEOs predict a 5-day return in 2026. So are Realogic's aiming this at the occupiers, To say it's unrealistic, or are they
yes.
aiming at the landlords to say you need to sort something out?
Mainly, they're actually aiming at occupiers, because that's their business. They do workplace analytics stuff. That 5 days back thing is from a PwC report a few weeks ago, which somehow said 60% of CEOs think we're all going to be back in the office 5 days a week within a couple of years, which just seemed totally bonkers to me.
So I don't know. Did you, just out of interest, did you link this feed up to your stream? You may not have done. Doesn't matter. When you share this link afterwards, will you include those two articles in the comments? Because I think that those are two really interesting articles for people to look at. I'm going to I had with and you will know Caleb Parker, because I know you're part of his advisory board.
Sorry, James, it's not adding my channels for some reason.
No, that's fine.
Well, I'll do yours afterwards.
I got on my sort of soapbox really, and just said I just think everybody is looking. No, it wasn't. It was Alice Yun Geo from Oxford Properties, and I got on a real rant and saying that everybody is expecting this to be too binary. Everybody is looking at this too short term. They're trying to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. It's ridiculous because of all the things that are coming up over the next 2 or 3, 5 years, where leases are coming to their expiry, and that's when we're going to start to see a bit of a trend as to what's going to happen. And I just said, we need to get out of the fact that our asset classes are no longer binary. There is no such thing as, an office, a home, a retail unit. Logistics and warehousing maybe slightly differently, but there is a fusion of asset at the moment in my mind. We have to realize that you're going to have to get comfy with terms like fusion, with flexibility. We also have to realize, and I think this is more, we're only going to find out this trend of whatever this, return to office, which by the way, I think is a ridiculously lazy phrase to use, over the next decade plus, because only then are we going to find what the real trend is. And by the way, the problem with the CEOs are predicting this 5-day return in 2026. It's not about the current employers. It's going to be about, current employees. It's going to be about the next generation of employees that are coming in, which, and it's all the graduates that are going to be coming in who have gone through the schooling system, the later element of their schooling system and education system in a COVID environment where they're going to be used to working in a flexible way. So it's just, in my mind anyway, I think it's too short-termism. I think reports like this are not going to do anybody any good. And I just think they are, I wouldn't even say clickbaity, because they're now getting a bit boring in my mind. I don't know if that's a bit unfair.
No, see, it's totally fair. And that was a very bizarre report. The most important word in what you've just said is flexibility. The only thing you can do in terms of planning, how are you going to design your building, how are you going to design your workspace, how are you going to design blah, 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 is it has to be flexible, because you simply don't know. I would give you a pretty good guess what things will be like in a year. Not a bad one in 2 years, but ask me 5 years, I have no idea.
No, I'm so pleased you said that, because you're bang on. There's not going to be a massive amount of difference, in my view, over the next 2 years. We are in a new normal, which we're trying to figure out where we are. But over 5 to 10 years' time, when all of the opportunities and the threats start to level out, who knows where we're going to be? And to be honest with you, no idea. So look, a couple of people just bringing, because I think it's always nice to say. So Brian, hi Brian, thanks for joining us. You've got someone who agrees with you, Anthony.
Well, occasionally it happens.
And then you've got David. Hi, Dave. Long time no speak, mate. Flexibility, 100%. We're all there. Listen, Anthony, we could spend hours debating this. There's no point. We're in agreement. Go on.
James,
what's up?
Can I jump to the second part of my first part, as it were?
Go on.
If I can share, I'm going to share my screen game with you.
Just share it out.
Okay. Can you see this now?
You've actually removed the stream, so if you just press the share screen on the bottom bit again, and then I can bring up the window. Just a little bottom set. There we go. Right, there we go. It's on. Yep. Okay.
This is a short report, or an essay rather, done by Rob Harris, who runs Bramidas Research. And Rob's old school and been around an awful long time. but I think is probably the best real estate analyst out there, and he writes these exceptional papers. And anyway, not long ago, he wrote this, and the title of this short little thing was "Work is the issue, not where it is done." So, going back to what we were saying, everyone fixates on where we're going to work and when we're going to work. And he says actually the problem is actually work itself. So he talks about the how it's commonplace now for the raft of proposed solutions to where we are, revolving around redesigning the workplace to create experience. But he goes on, but I argued that in doing so, there is a danger that we deal with the symptoms rather than the causes of dissatisfaction, and that the real causes lie in work itself and how it is changing rather than in the place of work.
Yeah.
And he talks about the changing nature of companies, which I think is so important. So I just want to read this little bit. Okay. While in the past, new businesses had to invest in expensive and long-term assets, including ICT systems and real estate, today's technological landscape enables them to compete globally with relatively little capital outlay, using cheap and ubiquitous technology without creating vast hierarchical armies. They do not aspire to having corporate bureaucracy. They comprise skilled and motivated people with significant intellectual capital working in specialist areas. So we now operate largely in a weightless economy, and real estate will have to become less heavy. We also have discerning customers, business and individuals, who have choice. We have large and small firms with the same workplace expectations. That does not require a new workplace design. It requires emerging models of workplace provision to evolve. So providers need to go further and build business communities and innovation districts above and beyond just workplace. So it's just a short little thing. I'm going to just work my way through it quickly. Workplace provision will need to address individualism, coming back to that again, through a shift in management thinking from imposing a unifying one-size-fits-all corporate culture to balancing its corporate priorities with the diverse needs of the individuals making up the workforce. So at the same time, increasing percentages of desks are occupied by contingent workers who have no emotional investment in the corporate body. Overall, the workforce is more transient. It is no longer a second home, which is very, very important in terms of the nature of how companies are made up and who works for them and how many are on the books and how many are off the books. But he then talks about crap law around David Graeber's quite well-known book, Bullshit Jobs. And he relates back to the reality of how so many people view their work. So he says that the CEO of HP, huge company, recently referred to an employee survey involving 15,000 office workers across 12 countries. Key among the HP Work Relationship Index findings was that just 27% of knowledge workers feel they have a healthy relationship with their work. Further, only 25% feel that they consistently receive the respect and value they deserve. Respondents said they yearn for purpose, empowerment, and genuine connection to their work, but just 29% say their job consistently fulfills these needs. 83% of people say they are willing to earn less if it means feeling happier at work. And I'm going to leave it at that, James, because that's basically the thrust of this paper, that a lot of people actually do very boring jobs. Yeah. And we have to account for that. And a lot of people aren't engaged with their work. How do we make our businesses more engaging and work better for people?
Yeah.
And of course, if you're going to slim your company right down, so you pull in and out contingent workers all the time, don't be surprised when your contingent workers aren't going to lay down their life for you because they're contingent workers. I just compared that with all the shenanigans with OpenAI a couple of weeks ago, where you ended up with 90% of the company signing a petition to say reinstate the boss that you just sacked.
Oh,
that's an outlier. Most companies are completely the opposite, and that all reflects on how
let's pick out a couple of points. And firstly, I was writing so madly in that using my little stylus that I've managed to break my nib. So I can no longer write. I can no longer write digitally. I mean, there's one thing breaking your pencil nib where you just get a sharpener. What do you do when you break your stylus?
I don't know. I think you have to get your card out again.
That's not very good, is it?
Not a good thing. I would have thought they were unbreakable, but clearly not.
Mate, so did I. Obviously not. I think it's really interesting. It goes back to something which I talked about very early on in the pandemic. And by the way, some really interesting comments coming in. You might want to have a read of them.
Yeah, I'm reading.
So, hey, Nick, by the way. And Nick has been frantically messaging on here and then WhatsApping me and talking about their occupier sentiment survey, which we'll bring in a minute. But just before I read them myself and bring in, I'm really struck by some of the terminology that is used in some of that in terms of things like individualism and whatever that first word was you talked about, where you got to make the office suit the person. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic that I didn't expect to still see playing out now, which was at the start of the pandemic when it was all work from home. One of the things I thought we would struggle with the most was around corporate brand and corporate culture. So you have brands like your Googles, your Facebooks, your WeWorks, where the office was such a central core component of the culture of that organization. Take Google. You had all the sort of, entire floors of the office laid on purely for the lunches, the breakfast, and that's where you had your meetings and all this sort of stuff. It was such a tied up element of the individual employee and the corporate culture. And that's why I find this really, really interesting now that we've almost got to rethink the role that the office plays in that individual's life, and the fact that the individual will be so transient now that the office doesn't hold the same tie, I suppose, that it once did. So some really interesting.
But the same thing with the company doesn't, James.
Oh no, exactly. 100%.
The company doesn't necessarily hold the same tie. So
your IP is now your intellectual property, which is you.
Yeah,
you own it. The company has no rights to that, and it's transient in itself.
But you still have to. I see a fully digitally transformed company as being one that obviously is end-to-end digital, but that does have a purpose and an ability to convey that purpose. And in this world where you need to attract very talented core people, but you also need to attract the very talented contingent ones. Yeah. So you actually do want contingent workers who are happy and delighted to come and work for you for 6 weeks or 6 months and then go, and then they come back. But they still feel part of you. Somehow you've got to engage your full-time workforce and your contingent workforce in some sort of shared purpose.
Yeah, shared value.
And the other thing with Google, part of the problem with Google, of course, is they're just too big. There's too many of them. You can do all that stuff, that cultural stuff, but when what's it's the Dunbar number, isn't it? It's like your number of friends, 150 people. But it's interesting if you look at how people talk about the different types of experience and management a startup needs when it's sort of 0 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 150, and then bigger. And then they're in a completely different world. And they say, that's why so many startup founders have to move away after a certain time because they're not the right type of people beyond a certain scale. But all that cultural stuff is part and parcel of digital transformation, I think.
That's exactly what I was coming to, which is there is a big element. I mean, and part of the reason why the book that we're writing is centering down much more on transformation is very much because it's not about technology. It's not about innovation. It's about leadership. It's about culture. It's about values. And they are actually the strongest element that means that a company will succeed or fail. And I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you about Google is too big. I'm not sure I necessarily see that, because there are plenty of large companies that succeed in journeys. It's just they are all large ships that you have to sort of turn and change, and it just needs a very different style of.
But it's also a fundamentally different thing. If you're a small company, if you're Google 20 years ago, everything you do had the potential to add 20, 50, 100% to your revenue, because you can grow so fast. Once you're Google size, most of their options are actually worse on the downside than they are good on the upside. This could be really good.
Yeah, but
if it goes wrong,
hang on, Anthony. That's not right, because you've got some large, and this is very much an innovation strategy. That it's not Google as a parent company that is the one doing the innovation. Quite often, they will create separate and entirely different entities that will house the innovation itself. And this is why, for example, in the corporate entity of Alphabet, you've then got all of the different companies which reside under that, with Google being one of them. And all of the other companies are actually able to either invest, build, buy other companies within the Alphabet family, which then have their own cost centers, their own budgets, which, yes, you're right, they are not going to provide a 20% uptick in Alphabet profits. And as a consequence, they wouldn't do it under the Alphabet name. It's the same as why, and this is a loose example, but it's it's one that is working for the built environment. It's why JLL took JLL Technologies and then JLL Spark out of the mothership of JLL, because they couldn't have an element of an innovation house where the returns weren't going to be significant on the JLL main company to actually house the innovation risk. So they have to separate it out. So there are just different ways that businesses will run that. But I'm going to come back to that in a second, because I want to talk, because it actually segues quite nicely into where I wanted to go this week. But just sort of bringing it in. So Brian, just going back to one of the earlier comments, he said the idea of blended assets aligns with mixed use view of cities. Agree. A view of hybrid is short-sighted and not aligned with how work post-pandemic happens. It's going to continue to evolve, that, I think, Brian. I've got Nick was very shouty about all of his stuff, so let's just bring in some of that. Return to office takeaways from the CBRE survey. The patterns globally are below pre-pandemic levels. Of course they are, but they are continuing to rise. I don't think that's the case everywhere, if I'm not mistaken, Nick. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think it is in some of the core and tier one offices in the sort of the tier one cities, but I don't think it is everywhere. Globally, the office remains a core element of corporate culture. Yes, I would agree. Focus on portfolio optimization means more. I'm just going to read this on because it actually goes on for a while. Focus on portfolio optimization means more than downsizing. Occupiers trade quantity for better quality space. 100% agree. And that is going to be the trend that I think we see over the next 10 years plus. Occupiers seek more flexibility in lease terms and building services. Yeah, 100%. So I think, Nick, you sent me a link on that. So we'll post that report in the sort of the show notes when Anthony and I summarize. So and Brian did actually put something else here. Yeah, okay, I think that's fair enough. He says that we would argue that we spent far too much time debating what the right amount of time in the office. Agree entirely. Little time studying the massive change that work has undergone during and post-pandemic. There has been an accelerated evolution from analog to digital, asynchronous and distributed work. Yeah, I agree. But one of the things, Anthony, and this is what I wanted to sort of go down this week, because we talked a little bit here about a very built environment specific challenge, which is return to office. And there is a real challenge of leadership to work out what the right action to take is. And I'm arguing that I don't think we know enough about it. I don't think we've given it enough time for the dust to settle. I think we are actually in a generational shift in the way that we use offices, and that we haven't yet seen the way that the next wave of sort of the new intake of people will come into the office space who have gone through, a sort of a 3-4 year challenge with their education systems and the way that they've studied and the way that they've gone to their exams and the way that they've done their apprenticeships and the way that they've experienced that first couple of years of their working environment. There's a sort of an entire generation that has been really sort of impacted by it. So I think we're in this really challenging bit, and it really made me reflect this week. So I'm reading what I think is a fascinating book by Pisano, I think is his name or her name. Hang on, let me just read it. Yeah, Gary Pisano, and it's called Creative Construction: The DNA of Sustained Innovation. And this is a very sort of generic book all over. And last week I read a passage in here, and it got me thinking about the variant skills that we need to create innovation teams. And it talks a lot about the synthesis of ideas. And I think one of the challenges we have within the real estate industry is that we have too similar people thinking a too similar way within our innovation teams. And as a consequence, we don't build the best innovation departments if we're lucky to have a department that can favor it. And that led me to putting an opinion out there, asking for people to say, what would you build as your perfect innovation team? And by the way, I still find it fascinating that everybody, sort of went down a particular line, and it was what I would call quite regular innovation people. And there were a few who said, we would bring in outside people into an innovation team to give us insight. But, there was no one talking about sort of business psychologists. There was nobody talking about philosophers. And actually having those sorts of insights within an innovation team, because I think genuinely they are the sorts of people we need to give us an informed perspective of what could be over a longer period of time. I think we're looking too short-termism. But this then led to the next chapter, and it was talking about the selection of innovation projects, right? But this could be applied more broadly. And they said that one of the biggest challenges, and I have heard this before, but it raised its level of consciousness for me around the challenge of leaders around both the term ambiguity and uncertainty. And that they are actually at a lot of fault of the inertia and the hesitancy to make decisions and to select an appropriate project to work on as innovation teams in this case. But I think it applies in this case, especially to what we've been talking about. I'm just going to sort of read you the difference, because I think the difference between the two really determine where leadership goes. So with uncertainty, you don't know in advance what you'll find, which project is the winner, which project is a loser. No one can be certain about how many resources or how much time will be required to complete a project. Along the way, you may discover new problems that you never thought of, and these will require more time and more resources. If you're working with newer technology or less familiar science, or in our case, an unknown because of the return to work challenges, you may simply just not know how long it will take to solve a particular problem, or indeed whether you can solve the problem at all. Finally, because by definition, innovation means something new, estimating basic value parameters like revenues and profits can be very difficult. So that's the sort of the aspect around uncertainty. And then you've got the ambiguity aspect, which is, it's the second challenge for selecting innovation projects, or essentially doing a next step. And ambiguity differs from uncertainty surrounding a lack of information about known parameters of the future. So uncertainty can usually be measured in terms of probability. Hello, Kat. For example, will it rain tomorrow? Because the forecast reckons there's a 40% chance. And
you can put a prediction on that. Yeah,
exactly. And as a consequence, so for our return to work stuff, we know there's going to be an aspect of a return to work. So leaders are just uncertain. But ambiguity is a lack of knowledge about the parameters themselves. It means you do not know what you do not know, or so-called unknown unknowns. It's that classic challenge. I just thought that was an interesting element. And it says here at the end, with uncertainty, you at least know the options, but you may not have all the information that you need. Sorry, the cat's trying to get stroked by the computer at this point. So with uncertainty, you at least know the options, but you may not have all the information that you need to estimate which options are most attractive. Yeah. That's everything that we've just been talking about.
That's a judgment thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And with ambiguity, you have not yet discovered the options themselves. Now, to bring
That's a vision thing.
Sorry?
That's a vision thing.
It is a vision thing.
You have to envision the future, and that's the difficult thing.
Okay, so now let me put this to you. But I'm interested in your perspectives, because what you've got here is you've got the return to office debate in the built environment, because it's a known unknown. No, it's an unknown known. But then let's take your passion of the artificial intelligence world. Do you feel that is more ambiguous, or do you feel it's more uncertain? I've got a view on that, and I'd like your perspective on it.
I think it's uncertain short term year. What was the other phrase? Uncertain or ambiguous? And ambiguous, hugely ambiguous over a 10 year period. I mean, just on one basis, there's theoretically, it's not that hard to do the sort of things that McKinsey do and come up with 60% of tasks that people are paid for in the world today could be automated. So you just go, well, get rid of 60% of work. But it never works like that. It never works like that. On the other hand, it could work like that. And if it did work like that, then the impacts are very, very dramatic. It's also a lot to do with how business leaders and society want to shape the future landscape. You can use AI to get rid of loads of jobs really pretty easily in a lot of situations. Or you can use AI to augment a lot of jobs and create a lot of jobs. If the incentives are loaded towards efficiency, then you end up with a difficult situation with lots of unemployment. If the incentives are more guided to augmentation, we could be in a very different world. But either way, over a 5-year period, certainly over a 10-year period, the sheer nature of what just about everyone does, certainly as knowledge workers, is going to fundamentally change, and that could have very dramatic implications.
So let's try and paraphrase it a little bit around that term being uncertain about the changes, or it's relatively ambiguous. If you were a real estate leader now, do you feel you have all of the knowledge of the parameters and the outcomes of an AI future in order to bet the house on it?
I know exactly what I need to do for the next year or so. But if I've got a big plot of land,
well, hang on. Okay. So let's work that out. What would you do as a real estate leader for the next year? How would you build AI into your strategy if you were a large commercial landlord?
I think the first thing I'd do would be to give access to probably I don't know, ChatGPT and Claude. Just give everyone access to it. Encourage people to play with these things.
Okay.
Continually iterate on. Let people build, measure, learn. Have a look. Come back to me weekly, monthly. Let's just keep getting. Let's learn. Let's learn as a company what we could do. I would put in incentives to incentivize people to really lean in and push on this, because it's quite easy to see situations where people within a company could know, well, we could apply AI to that, but that would completely bugger up. They're dead. That whole area is gone. And so they don't do it. So we need to incentivize. Well, if you're going to suggest something which leads to the different work patterns, we are going to be trying to run the company in this way. We will help people, or we will try and redirect them, or whatever. You've got to show that the company is willing to expand and move fast, but not break people in the meantime. Otherwise, companies get very sclerotic. Everyone hides their information, doesn't say anything. And I'd pretty much just do that for the next 6 months, 12 months, I'd just learn like crazy up and down the stack. This is not give it to the IT department to play with. Everyone has to do it. Everyone has to do it, and everyone needs to talk to everyone else.
Okay, so how would you then manage the privacy aspect of as a leader of a large commercial entity? How would you ensure that the sort of the business secrets were withheld in terms of any data that could be shared within it, any private?
Well, there's different ways you can do that. You can actually, so certainly with ChatGPT, you can get an enterprise version of it. So the bigger companies should be looking at signing up for the enterprise version, which basically puts you in a sandbox. For other people, I would say to make it a rule of thumb: you do not put customers' data up there. You do not put proprietary data up there. But what you can do with a lot of these things is you can create synthetic data. So, for instance, I was trying to do something the other day, working out how we could use ChatGPT to help with analyzing a real estate cash flow forecast. But I don't have a data set of cash flow forecast. So I first of all asked it, well, what would the fields be in a cash flow forecast? And then can you simulate 500 records for me? And it will simulate 500 records for you. And then you play with that. So, you're trying to work out what these things can do rather than necessarily doing anything.
Okay, so let's just again go back and paraphrase a little bit. So what you would do now as a real estate leader, when you're dealing with the uncertainty and the ambiguity which comes from this very potentially disruptive force of AI, is you would say for the next year we genuinely have to understand just what we can do with it. So you would encourage your staff to play and work out what they can do within their roles to make them more productive. Is that a fair?
That's absolutely what it is. Everyone in the company needs to understand what these things can do, and how you make them do that. I mean, you ought to look at the big study that was done with Harvard, Wharton, and MIT and Boston Consulting Group.
Yeah,
and 750 Boston Consulting Group consultants. Within creative tasks, it made the range of improvements were between 17% and 40%. The below the mean performers within BCG consultants were made 40% better by using these technologies, and the best people were made 17% better. Not necessarily productive, but better ideas, better processes, whatever. So the point is, the more of your employees that are familiar enough with this stuff to be able to leverage it as and when we really want to put pedal to the metal, the better. You have to get your teams to lean into this stuff.
Cool. Interesting. All right. So look, I think that was really a really good way of putting it. Now, the last thing I really want to bring up, because I'm conscious of time.
Sorry, James, there is one other little thing which is very pertinent to this, which I want to get in for 5 minutes before we stop.
Yeah, go on. Well, no, go on. Do that now.
Okay. Can I go back to my screen?
Screen share. Yeah, it's on. Go for it.
Oh, is it? It's still on.
Oh, hang on. No, you've just turned it off. Just click that button again in the middle for share screen.
Yeah.
And then I'll get the option.
If you click it, it goes.
Yeah. Right, there you go.
Okay. These are a few slides actually from my course, and it's a new presentation I prepared yesterday, because it's based on a lecture which is on YouTube by Andrej Karpathy, who was the head of AI at Tesla for a long time, and was one of the founding members of OpenAI, and is something of a sort of original god within the AI world. And it's a brilliant lecture, which is very appropriate for non-technical people, got an introduction to large language models. So he explains how large language models work, but he then goes on to, well, where are large language models heading? And he talks about these 3 things that are likely to happen, and these are likely to happen pretty quickly, at least from a technical point of view, which is going to transform the way everybody uses computers. So first off, language models are going to learn how to think fast and slow. They're going to learn how to self-improve, and then they're going to learn through a range of different tools how to expand their knowledge and capabilities. So the thinking fast and slow comes from the Danny Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, in the sense of this is how we work. There's some things that we respond to very quickly, instinctively. That's system 1 thinking. And then there's system 2 thinking, when you take your time and you have to deliberate and ponder and think things through. The difference is, in a system 1, would be like playing speed chess. You haven't got time to think. It's by instinct. You move the pieces by instinct. System 2 is what you do in competitions, when you take a couple of minutes to think about every move. Large language models at the moment are all system 1. They're instinct. They just boom, straight out. He reckons that we are approaching the ability to ask them as appropriately, take your time, think about this, verify your answers. And that's a big difference, because it means you can deal with different types of problems. The second huge change will be the ability for language models to improve themselves. Now, DeepMind, which is Google's research lab, has famously had the system to win at Go, the board game, and AlphaGo was their program to use that was used to play Go against people. The first version of it was trained by imitating human players. So they just took as many games as they could and they played against people. And that's one way of learning. But then suddenly they got to a point where actually they could just play against themselves. So instead of their computer playing a human and learning from that, it got to the stage where the computer could play another computer, and they played against each other. And the way these systems work, that works if you have what's called a reward function. So you can say, well, we're going to play. Who do we know? How do we know who gets the reward? Well, in Go, the reward goes to whoever won the game. The difficulty at the moment is understanding, when you're just talking about language, how do you create a reward function so you can work between the two machines and say who's won, and let's go on, let's play a game. But he says,
how do you decide who is better, almost?
Yes, exactly. Once you can understand a reward function, you can get machine to play with machine, and then they learn very quickly. And then the third big change is going to grow out of what happened at OpenAI a few weeks ago when they had their developer day, and they launched these things, these GPTs, which are custom GPTs. So, for instance, I did one which is called a lease negotiator. So I created this custom GPT, which will advise you how to negotiate an office lease. And it's basically a very simple way of tuning the system and also adding in your own data for it to use. Now, you put those three together, and this is where we're going in terms of computing, where language models actually become the kernel of a new operating system. So the way you interact with your computer will be through text or voice. So everything you want to know, you will ask the language model. The language model will interpret what you need, and then will go off to see what extra information it needs, to use a calculator, to go somewhere else for video, to go somewhere else for audio, to use a browser if it needs to connect with other language models. But whatever it needs to solve a problem, it does. So you abstract out computing. So in the sense of something like real estate, particularly real estate investment, instead of having to understand how to learn these very complicated programs to build financial models of which asset you should buy or which asset you sell, you literally start talking to the machine and saying, which assets should we sell? These are our current criteria at the moment. Let it go and do it. And that is such a massive difference to where we're going. Probably this is maybe 5 years away to be commonplace, but we're already there in many ways, that we're starting to learn that everybody can have access to advanced computing so long as they are capable of asking a good question. And I'll stop at that, James, if you want to unshare. And this point about asking a good question gets back to your skills and preparedness. So another thing that I, as a CEO of a real estate company, would be asking people would be for them to critically evaluate their own jobs and their own workflows and work out how they can define the questions that would enable them to do what they want to do, which really means you have to very critically think about your processes and what are they actually trying to do.
Tell you what, it's very much putting people in a very difficult situation's not the right word, but a predicament in terms of questioning their own value.
Yes.
And it's only going to be those that are very confident, again, is probably not the right word, but what is the right word? Reassured, I suppose, that, you know, they know their own value and that actually they feel confident enough that using newer technologies, and I'm not just going to mention AI here because it's you know, new innovations will come along, and it's that realization which I know you and I have talked about a lot, which is human plus machine is better than machine. And I think it needs an element of understanding that just because we're asking you to do this stuff and to self-evaluate and to self-critique, it doesn't mean you're replaceable. It's going to show leadership and management that you are the right, you know, you are the right machine. Sorry, you're the right human to work with the right machine.
Yeah, can I jump in there, James? One of the things, it's almost the central point that I try and make to students on my course, that at the moment, and this is probably true for the next couple of years, these tools are most beneficial to you as an individual, than as a company. Because to integrate these tools into a company is complicated for all manner of reasons. Every software integration is complicated. These are especially complicated. But for you individually, I've had this discussion before. For $20 a month, you can buy an access to ChatGPT Pro, and you can sit there and train the hell out of yourself. They are fantastic trainers. What do I need to know? And even start with that message. If you went onto ChatGPT after this and said to it, I work as a junior valuer in a international real estate consultancy group. What do I need to know about artificial intelligence and future technologies? And it will come back with something. And if you just follow that rabbit hole, in no time at all, you are going to at least have one up on your peers. And ultimately, at a company level, we all have to work together. But right now, my number one advice certainly to a 20-year-old would be get one of these tools and learn the hell out of everything and use it.
Anthony, I would love to have seen you as a 20-year-old.
Yeah, well, I mainly didn't do that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. With the benefit of hindsight, you've got to try and recommend to your 20-year-old self what you would do. It's probably not what we would all do. Okay, well, look, I tell you what, I'm not going to go into much depth on the final piece, but this is a totally different area. It's a frustration of mine is terminology within the sector. And we all tend to use different terms for different things. And this is it's an observation. This is like 30 seconds. But I was in Hong Kong, as you know, last week. Fascinating city, by the way. Really, really, really a great pleasure to go. But there was a lot of terminology by the traditional industry to talk about proof of concept. You need to get a proof of concept. You need to get a POC. No tech startup can do anything without a POC. And I'm sitting there going, proof of concept? Why is this suddenly all important? And it really struck me. So I'm just going to share my screen here a second. Where are we here? So can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
So this was an article which came out this week by Nesta, and it's by a lady called Kelly Duggan, and it's very much on a sort of a governmental level, and it's talking about sort of the innovation stages and the tests that different governments can go through. And it really struck me as being quite important, and as a sense of terminology, probably something that we need to realize. So you've got proof of concept, obviously right down here in the bottom left of the graph, which is really where, and you won't be able to read this, but there's a hunch or an idea, and there's really the unit of testing is very little. It's, you almost haven't got anything developed. You are just developing a very, very, very basic proof that something you're working on is possible. Yeah. And you basically go from bottom left to top right, where you're working with a whole component of what you're going to test, and the sort of it's a fully implemented solution at this point. It's not a hunch, and that's where your MVP works. And then between there, you have your prototype, which actually is the largest sense of testing, your pilot, and then obviously onto your MVP. And it struck me that everybody in Hong Kong was talking about proofs of concept, but actually, I don't believe they're talking about a proof of concept. I think they're talking about a pilot, where the government and a lot of the larger companies want to see pilots of these startups working. And I think it's a really important understanding the traditional industry has, which is a proof of concept. And in this article, which I will share, and this is too small, I can't make it any larger, I'm afraid, is a very useful table of telling what the difference between a proof of concept and an MVP is. And the biggest thing is that a proof of concept or a prototype is really done and tested within a lab or a studio environment. It's an idea, it's a hunch, it's an assumption. It's really, really very early stage. It's done by internal stakeholders who are testing it, and perhaps sort of the sponsors or the shareholders who are testing the sort of the concept. Whereas an MVP, it's live testing. It's done by real users. It's continuous. It keeps on going. It's a core part of the solution. It involves live testing, not just sort of discussions around it. And I just felt that we really need to be very, very sure about whether we are talking about a proof of concept, which is done almost in-house between early stage founders, and a pilot and an MVP, which are very late stage. It's very live. It's right at the end of the cycle, where you need that live and continuous testing by potential users. And that's right at the end.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised where they put MVP though, because I've always understood, following from the sort of, the Eric Ries book, the point of an MVP, your minimum viable product, is the minimum that you need to do to get it in the hands of a user.
Correct.
And this getting it, admittedly, this is relating primarily to well, not necessarily primarily, but was written with software in mind. That you have to get a user actually, the old joke of no businessman, no business plan meets its first meeting with a customer.
Yeah.
Right. But I would have thought an MVP, proof of concept is almost like, well, you and I chat for half an hour and we can write a side of A4, and that's your proof of concept. That's logical.
Yep.
You've got to then prove it. One of the things I'm inclined to think though, James, is that this whole do a proof of concept, do a pilot and roll it out very slowly is very indicative of a company that's fighting to maintain the status quo, really, as opposed to a company that you should be in many ways producing MVPs all the time. How do you get an innovative company as opposed to an innovative?
But that depends whether or not you're talking about corporate innovation or startup innovation. I think they're very different things.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about corporate innovation. Yeah. You've got to get these things. Correct. You've got to get everybody collaborating and pinging off each other. That thing about. I think it was Alex Pentland, Sandy Pentland, wrote the book about social physics, and he says what makes a really successful team, and he does a diagram, and it would like, I don't know, 16 people in the diagram, and a not very successful team. If you look at all the connections between who talks to who, you might have 8 of them talk a lot, but then 8 of them don't talk. A really successful team is when you have 16 people and they all talk the hell out to everyone. Plus, the super successful teams are when they then talk to lots of other people outside their bubble as well. So this thing of connectivity between more people inside and outside. It's the old Bill Joy, who one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, who said my favorite quotation of, no matter who you are, most of the interesting people in the world work somewhere else. So getting outside, when you're talking about what you were reading just then, to deal with ambiguity, you need to talk to you need to kiss a lot of frogs.
Yeah, and I won't. We'll probably, that's an ideal place to finish. But your quote about Sun Microsystems is bang on, and I'm not. There were 2. This chapter I've just read about synthesis is exactly, it's all that, and they use 2 examples. One from Bell.
The original Bell Labs.
Yeah. And one was from, I can't remember what else, but it was exactly what you've just talked about, in the sense of the synthesis is, Bell Labs. So Bell Labs is a great example of how structuring to intentionally drive cross-disciplinary integration can produce big benefits. And that is what you've just talked about in terms of having lots of people in different areas. Having the right talent on board is important, of course, but meshing talent together is often what is needed for transformative innovation. And putting some combination of various disciplines together at one point is critical. But what they've said about Bell Labs, a good thing about that is it's a good idea, but what if the new combinations become relevant to future innovations? Say, an organization can find itself laden with an obsolete structure. And that's part of the challenge. Some of the areas might now be obsolete, and you're getting cross-disciplinary teams, and actually they're no longer relevant. So there is a challenge there. And the other one they use is, you've talked about their cross-disciplinary, but the other element is what they call soft structure innovation. And that is really where Amazon comes in. Apple were also really good with that, where they don't have in their case, in Amazon case, they don't have a service division or any other division or home. But what they do is they have a core team and they bring in lots of skills from outside of that particular business unit and entirely different units that come together. And they said that there is a real risk of, when you're creating teams, to have what they call a very limp or matrixed team. When a company is organized around market-facing business units, it might create matrices of teams for different kinds of cross-divisional integration efforts. And it's, in theory, it's not a bad idea, but if they don't have any real teeth and they don't have budgets because they're just a bit of a limp team of people brought together with no budgetary sort of responsibility or any absolute goals that they've got to hit, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, air cover from the CEO is vital. You do need budget, and then you do need this floating role at the top level, whose job it is to do the multifunctional thing and to weave everything together. That's my issue sometimes with innovation departments. There is a tendency to it turns into, well, that's just a department. Whereas you need someone at the top, and that innovation. It's a bit like the thing about, I don't know if this is so true, but for a very long time, Amazon didn't have an IT department as such, because IT is embedded everywhere. That's the point.
Yeah, but I've got to say, Anthony, the amount of times I've heard an organization say, "Oh, we haven't got an innovation department because innovation is embedded within the
I know,
and I honestly, I now sit there now with so much skepticism when I hear that term. It switches me right off. Anyway, listen, man, we've been going on for ages in our unscripted world, and I'm sure if anybody is ever interested in our stuff, then they can reach out. But again, this is just you and I having a little chat for our little catch up during the weeks, and a talk about what we found interesting. So I really like what you've come up with, and it's really interesting. So thanks as always for your insights.